This is a story about the vindication of the goat. Now, it is an accepted cliche that life is a learning curve. Babies learn to crawl, to walk. Children learn to read and write. And as one grows older, one is confronted by a mass of information. There are huge advances in technology, and man, if receptive, is forever learning. He learns about the statements of the day, and which is generally considered to be the wisdom of the day. And yet, amongst all this information, there is often disinformation based on incorrect perceptions or beliefs. And the challenge is to distinguish between fact and fiction. It also often happens that the so-called wisdom of the day is often endorsed by the powers that be, thus enforcing the belief that the untrue is really true. The history of man is fraught with examples of such faulty wisdom. Not too many centuries ago, the wisdom was that the earth was flat. And if seafarers ventured too far into the deep, they would fall off the edge and end up in some awful abyss. This so-called wisdom was at that stage the official policy of the rulers of the day. Later, when it was actually accepted that the earth was round, the wisdom of that day was that the earth was central in the universe and that the sun revolved around the earth. This wisdom was upheld so fiercely that Galileo was threatened with the most terrible punishment if he did not recant his statement that the earth actually revolved around the sun. Not too many years ago, the president of our country proclaimed that HIV/AIDS was in fact a syndrome and not caused by a virus. And this view was enthusiastically endorsed by the Minister of Health and the Department of Health. Now, in my career of almost 40 years of agriculture research, I was also confronted by the official support of the wisdom of the day, which eventually was debunked. As recently as the 1980s, the goat was regarded with great disfavour, being characterised as a destroyer of vegetation and an inefficient producer of red meat. And I would really like to think of this talk as the vindication of the goat. The Department of Agriculture actually actively encouraged the replacement of goats with wool sheep in betterment areas of the Eastern Cape, a recommendation which has had profound negative effects on the present natural vegetation. The official position was reinforced by the perception that goats were usually found grazing in denuded and eroded areas. The connection was obvious. Goats equals degradation equals soil erosion. Therefore, goats must be bad. I was even taught this at university. And yet, there were no hard scientific information to support or refuse this perception. But the view that goats were bad was fiercely opposed by some prominent goat breeders in the Eastern Cape. And a research proposal was prepared by the Duty Agriculture Research Institute to characterise the role of the goat in veld management. This met with certain opposition from the powers that be at head office, because why go and research the obvious? But with grace, we received approval to go ahead, albeit rather hesitantly, and we could fund this project. Within 3 years of starting the project, it became clear that when sound grazing management was practiced, the goat was in fact far superior to wool sheep in preserving the natural cover of veld vegetation, and should actually be the preferred grazing animal in certain veld types. Further research justified goat farming in certain veld types characterized by woody vegetation, in that in these areas the Boer goat was far superior to beef animal as a producer of red meat per unit area. So, within a few years, the official policy of the department was completely reversed, and goat breeding or goat farming was actually recommended. And this led to quite remarkable changes in certain areas of the Eastern Cape, where farmers replaced their wool sheep with goats, or introduced goats into their flocks. The vindication of the goat actually had further far-reaching implications, in that, being recognized as a superior producer of red meat, goats have now, or the Boer goat, has now become established in countries like Australia, New Zealand, the Middle East, and even in the United States of America. This as a result of a rather simple research project undertaken in the Eastern Cape, which was actually against the wisdom of the day. One can ask, but why was there this perception that the goat degraded vegetation? The truth of the matter is that goats are very efficient converters of forage into red meat, and were able to survive in degraded conditions where sheep and cattle had to be removed, and they were not the primary cause of degradation. Some of the other research projects were undertaken at Duni to explore the foundations of the perceptions of so-called wisdom of the day. And in several cases it transpired that recommended practices could not be supported by scientific research. Now, what all these experiences have resulted in is that today I have a healthy skepticism to accept unquestionably the so-called obvious truth or the wisdom of the day. I believe it is important to try to have an open mind regarding important issues, to prevent being manipulated by purveyors of the wisdom of the day, and to make rational and informed decisions based on